T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Coach on Fire Radio.
Hey everyone, welcome again to another edition of the Greatness Movement podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Weiss. I'm a life coach, author, and the founder of the Greatness Movement based here in Phoenix, where it's our goal to guide you to be the greatest version of yourself. Now, as I do always, please, especially this show, share it. Whether you're on YouTube watching, whether you're on Facebook, Instagram, whatever platform you're watching, tonight we're going to cover something that everybody needs to see, whether you're a man or a woman. It's critically important that we get this message out. And I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm diving into a topic that a lot of people want to stay away from. And studies now show that women are more abusive than men. And I also think it doesn't take into account all the underreporting. So the goal here, I have several goals with tonight. The first goal is this is not to demean women or men. Both sides are abusive. The key to remember here with abuse is it's taught. Think of that. See, this is one of the things no one ever wants to talk about when somebody's been abusive is they learned it. In other words, they suffered abuse. That's why they're an abuser. I remember the Jerry Sandusky case years ago, the football coach who abused all those kids and everyone's screaming and yelling, want to hang him by his toes. And I never heard anybody bring up the topic of, well, where did he learn that? Like, that's heartbreaking. So whatever form of domestic abuse, and I'm going to get into all the details of it tonight, whatever form of domestic abuse you've suffered or you've witnessed, whether you're a male or a female, and even if you're the perpetrator of it, my heart breaks for everybody involved, and especially the abuser, because they got taught to be an abuser. So don't lose sight of that, all right? If you've been abused, don't lose sight of that. I'm not condoning the behavior, but I want to make that clear because I've never heard, when anyone talks about abuse, they just jump into what a awful person the abuser is. And they always forget there's no humanity. There's no empathy for, wait a minute, this is a cultural dynamic that's been going on for centuries, a family dynamic that's probably been going on for generations. And nobody wants to talk about that they got taught by their parents or someone in their family. So let's make sure we keep that at the forefront as we go forward here. So again, please share this show, whatever format you're watching. We need to get this message out. The other thing I want to say is this is going to be tough for me. In both the situations I've been in two abusive dynamics, and my kids are involved. And so this isn't an easy thing for me to bring up. Because of the impact on them. So I'm going to do my best to navigate this as open and vulnerable as I can be, but bear in mind the impact this could have on my kids. So that's the next goal I have is I'm going to be incredibly transparent. If I hold back things, it's in protection of my kids, and I'm going to let you know when that is and why I'm doing that. My other goal here is I want to share some stats, straight from the CDC, because I don't want it to me just talking. I'm going to read it to you, so you know exactly what the report says. Because I know there are a ton of women who are going to be in massive denial. No, this isn't true, or you're victim hating. There's going to be bashing from that side. That's okay. I know where it comes from. They're just hurting, but I'm going to give the stats, not my opinion, but the facts of the situation. I'm also going to share my own abuse history, some things I've been through. Again, there are certain details I'm going to leave out because of my kids. And And then I'm going to go through a list of what is abusive, because I think in many cases, both sides don't even know they're being abusive. I know this, a lot of men put up with behavior from women and they're not even aware. I know it took me so long to even, I'd been hit, and just, it's still, there's this piece of me that goes, yeah, but you just sort of brush it off, like the stigma we have in society that only men are abusive. That's what you run up against. And so I want to give a whole laundry list, because I'm sure there's some women that are going to be watching this and they don't even know they're abusive. It's going to be the first time it ever crosses them. They're like, oh my God, I had no idea that's a form of abuse. So it's really about education and getting the word out. So the first place I want to start is I want to read to you excerpts, and I may have shortened certain parts because I thought about, if I read this the way they have it written, it's going to get confusing. So like when it came to statistics and things, I kind of reworded it a little bit, or took certain aspects out so that it wouldn't clutter you with information that you didn't really understand what was going on. So I want to make sure you know that. But you can go to the CDC website and pull up intimate partner violence. The study is right there. And if you do enough research, there's been hundreds of studies done that show this and prove this. And the other thing I want you to remember, for those doubters, is because we have a culture and a history in this world that thinks, especially for men, there's something wrong with you if you let a woman abuse you and everything, the underreporting and the misinformation and the denial that men are in and suffering in abuse. The numbers, I know, I don't have proof, but I know from people I've talked to, and just being out in public, watching men and women, the numbers are staggeringly higher than what I'm going to read to you. I know that. And I want to bring some clarity to that. So I'm going to read to you from this study just to get started, just to get the facts out there. We'll start there, and then we'll get into the more salient parts of it. So according to a survey by the Centers for Disease Control and Department of Justice, in the last 12 months, more men than women, totaling 53%, were victims of intimate partner physical violence. What that means is 53% of men were surveyed, and so it was 44% of women had been abused. So the numbers are much higher for men than they are for women. And over 40% of that 53% of men suffered severe physical violence directed at them. These numbers do not, this is one thing to keep in mind, these numbers do not include women who threaten men with a knife or a gun. So these numbers are leaving out a major way women abuse men. Men were also more often the victim of psychological aggression, coercive control, and control over sexual or reproductive health. So every area, women were more abusive. Despite this, few services are available to male victims of intimate partner violence. Domestic violence against men is real, and it takes just as many forms as domestic violence against women. It's physical, it's sexual, it's reproductive, it's financial, emotional, and psychological. Now I'm going to get into a few of the aspects when it comes to psychological aggression, because a lot of women and men, I see people do this all the time. They're abusing each other, and I don't think they're even aware of it. Psychological aggression is control or reproductive or sexual health. So the question is, what's more violent? Brandishing a knife at your spouse in the heat of an argument, or refusing to wear a condom, or calling your spouse fat or stupid? The report didn't ask about knife wielding, but did ask about condoms and name calling. Men were more often the victims of both psychological aggression, expressive aggression, coercive control, and control of reproductive or sexual health. Name calling is one of the forms of expressive aggression, which includes acting angry in a way that seemed dangerous, name calling, insulting remarks. The other category of psychological aggression is coercive control, such as restricting access to friends or relatives and having to account for all of your time. In the last 12 months, 18.1% of men, while only 13.9% of women, were subjected to psychological aggression. The main forms of expressive aggression against women were insults and name calling. For men, the top items were being called names and being told they were a loser. Those are the ways, and I'm going to get into more detail as to how both sides are. I'm going to frame it from the perspective of how women are abusive to men, but you can flip the tables. Men do the same things. There might be slight variations. Again, women will much more often control sexually inside of a relationship than men. So there are anomalies, but you can pretty much take all of the stuff. I see a question here about the study. Karen, you can find it on the CDC website. It's right there. Just look under intimate partner violence, and it's right at the top. You can pull up all the details. There was another extensive study done by Maureen McLeod. She's an assistant professor of criminal justice at Stockton College. She conducted the most exhaustive examination of police reports on spousal abuse. Now, this goes back 30, 40 years. So this problem has been around for a long time, and nobody's talked about it, all right? Here's what she says, and this is quote, "Offenses against men are significantly more serious in nature." She noted, whereas just over 25% of all spouse abuse incidents involving female victims are categorized as aggravated assaults, the corresponding number for male victims is 86%. Over 2/3 of that 86% of those events are serious assaults with a deadly weapon. So her investigation showed that 86% compared to 25%. Women were 86% more violent, while men were 25% violent. These are cold, hard facts that are out there if you're willing to do the research. And again, nobody's talked about it, in part because men have been abusive. I'm not going to deny it. And we've done an amazing job to educate the culture, and there are tons of resources for women to get help. One of the main problems for men is if you call a hotline, and I didn't get into this. See, I'm going to do this in two parts. Maybe I'll save this. I'll save this part. But when I had this experience myself, I called the police officer wouldn't even talk to me. So anyway, that I'm going to deal with that and how we can make a change next week. I don't want to get into that right now. What I want to deal with is just the cold, hard facts. So this is also part of the CDC and Department of Justice study. In 41.5% of the cases where men called the police, in 21% of those cases, the police refused to arrest the woman. In 38%, the police said there was absolutely nothing they can do and left. See, even the police, we have a bias in society. The police won't even protect men either. Now, both sides should be protected. So look at that. That's just over 2% or just under 3% when a man calls the police, where the police will actually advocate for them. Imagine the outcry if women only saw 3% of the police getting involved when a man abused them. This country, this world would be in an uproar. We need the same uproar for men. This needs to be a dual process. This is an epidemic on both sides of the fence. This is not a male-specific problem or a female-specific problem. This is a societal problem. Both sides need help, and that's the other thing to remember. Again, I'm going to say it. If you're a female who's an abuser, if you're a man who's an abuser, you are not a bad person. You are in tremendous pain from the own abuse you've suffered. You need help. Both sides do. So I want to make that clear. All right. The other thing to note is that women who do the abusing are much more likely to throw something, kick, bite, hit with an object, threaten with a knife, or actually use a knife more than men are. Now, before I get into my own abuse history, I want a little bit of a disclaimer here. I've seen couples who willingly and what is it when you get I'm drawing a blank, when you get permission, who give each other permission to be condescending, to be disrespectful and sarcastic. I've seen it happen all the time, and I'm not including any of that in this. Some couples, they don't, for whatever reason, they don't think that's abusive. Okay, and so I'm not talking to them. If both sides mutually agree to certain behavior, fine. I'm not going to judge it. It's your life. If you like it and you don't think it does anything to you, knock yourself out. I'm fine with that. Same thing with sex. You know, with the whole 50 Shades of Grey and all of that stuff, there are people who do what some would consider abuse, but since both are consenting adults, none of that is part of this. Okay? I'm leaving all of that out. All right? This is unwanted abuse. Okay? So I'm going to move into my own abuse history. And what I experienced. And the first case was, and I'm just catching a comment as somebody wants to argue with the facts. Go look up the facts yourself. I'm not going to get into an argument. I've done the research, and so I'm not going to buy into that side of the argument. The facts are out there, and so I'm just not going to engage it. That's somebody who's in denial, and I will love them enough to stay in their denial. So I've read you the verified reports. If you disagree with that from the CDC, by all means, knock yourself out. But this is part of the problem, is people probably I don't know, but it would be my guess, a woman's been abused, and so because of that abuse history, she still wants men to be the problem. I don't know that that's true, but that will happen to a lot of women and men. They'll still blame the other side. I'm not going to get into that debate. I'm not going to, because that would be furthering the abuse on them. So I won't entertain that. So anyone who comments that way and wants to argue with it, I'll just say thank you for commenting. I appreciate it, but I'm not going to join in the debate because the research is there. So if you want to do the research, you can. So I want to make that disclaimer too. I'm fine with people disagreeing with me and being in denial. That's wonderful. Please do. I just won't join you in it. Okay, that's all. So I will love you right where you are. Okay. My own abuse history started, and women will do this a lot with money. Men do it too. There's a person who helped me financially, sucked me in. I felt kind of guilty and trapped. We got into a relationship, and then as the relationship ended, she made sure she got pregnant. Now, here's the vulnerable aspect of that is, I have a son that I've never met as a product of that. And that's not true. I met him once. It was in that, I can't remember exactly, the first week of his birth. And there's a long story as to why I haven't seen him since then. I've reached out to him, but right now he's not ready to have a conversation. We texted for a while, but I haven't heard from him in a long time. And so I out of respect for him, I can't get into the details as to, I don't know, but because of the situation, I make up the story he was told, and I know the abusive nature of his mother. And that's okay. He gets to go at his pace and what works for him. And I don't need to get into the details to prove I'm right or anything like that. The bottom line is he's an innocent party who has suffered a lot. And so whether who's right or who's wrong doesn't matter. What matters is he didn't have a father. growing up. And that's heartbreaking. And so what matters is what works for him, not what works for me. I mean, of course I'm devastated, but this isn't about me. I'm not going to beat down his door and force my presence upon him. He gets to decide what works for him. But unfortunately, the deeper details to that, I have to leave out because he doesn't even know them. And I don't know if he wants to know them. And so I don't want him to find out this way if for some reason he were to stumble across this. So that's why I'm going to leave that out. He gets to decide if that's information he wants. Okay. So that was the way I was financially and sexually controlled, coerced, as I guess are the terms that the study would use. The second instance was my first marriage. And again, money was used also to bring me in. The other aspect that was involved was, and I'm going to get to, and I'm going to kind of list some of the things I went through. And then afterwards, like I said, I'm going to give you a laundry list of ways people abuse. And so some of this you may go, well, what's the big deal? It may not seem like it was an abusive act. And that's probably because you don't have the information. So I just want to kind of go through it first, and then I'll talk about the rest of it. So at the time, one of the ways people abuse is they control what you do for work, how you spend your time. And so I was playing pro hockey at the time, and I was given a choice, hockey or the relationship. That's in a form of coercive control. I was also asked to choose between my family and the relationship. So I went, it was 10 years or almost 10 years without seeing or speaking to anyone in my family. That's one of the things abusers do, is they divide you. They create a split. And so they can segregate you and put you on an island. They can control you more. So that was another aspect of what I went through in that marriage. They controlled all the money. I had a construction company, and they refused to let me handle the finances. And this sounds so silly, and even kind of coming from me, but here's why this happens. Because the threat of aggression is always underlying. And so you feel like if you challenge it, if you say, no, look, it's my business or whatever, you challenge any of these things. The fear, like I can't describe to you the fear being around someone like this causes. I'll never forget, after the divorce, a friend of mine went to do some work on the house when we were selling it during the divorce, and she attacked him. And 3 years later, we just mentioned her name, and his skin, all the hair on his arm would just stand up, and his skin would bubble, and he'd just start sweating. The power that words and venom like that can have are indescribable. And so it sounds silly to say that, I got controlled by money and all this stuff, but when you're immature, when you lack the tools that I teach now, it's the best you can do. And that's, I'm going to get into that. A lot of the reason people get abused, like myself, is because we have a culture that's literally operates about a second, third grade level emotionally. We don't teach anything about codependence or relationships or parenting or emotions. And so we're all massively immature, and we don't have the skills and tools to navigate things like this. Sitting from the outside, everyone goes, wow, come on, I'd never let that happen to me. Okay. That's an immature response. And so these things happen because we don't have the skills. We don't have the self-esteem. We don't have all that. That's the whole reason I started the greatness movement. That's why I want to do this podcast. I'm sure I'm going to aggravate a lot of people, and that's wonderful. Let's stir the hornet's nest a bit. That just tells me it's bucking up against some things they don't want to confront in themselves, and that's wonderful. It's a sign of their immaturity. and the areas they need to grow in. And that's wonderful. Discomfort is great for all of us. We need that to mature as a society so we can put an end to this, because that's what will end this, is we have to be able to discuss this without getting defensive and dropping into denial and everything else. And so if you're getting defensive and dropping into denial, that's a wonderful opportunity to show you that the greatness movement is for you, that there's a lot of personal work and emotional maturity sitting in front of you, and embrace it. It's a gift. It's not a problem. It's a gift. So the other way the abuse was perpetrated was only on a few occasions was I ever allowed alone with the kids, or especially to leave the house alone with the kids. I'd want to go take them somewhere. She wouldn't let it happen. Now I have to own something. Like I said, I want to be vulnerable and transparent. There was one time I can't remember, it was, well, I don't want to say it, one of my daughters, and went to the gas station, and I ran in and got a Coke, and I left her in the car. That's abusive. I have to admit it. That's terrible parenting. And so I can see why she'd be upset. Upset with that instance. But that an instance like that is then how they justify their abuse of, now you're completely bad and I can't trust you with anything. But I have to own that I was an abusive parent in that moment to my child. So there's no getting around that. But yeah, the kids, I was never allowed to take care of them, except in this case. This is what's funny about an abuser. I went in and had surgery. I had both my knee operated on and my hand. I couldn't walk or move. She left me in the care of a 18-month-old and a 4-year-old for about 6 hours. Left me there. About the only time she'd ever leave me alone with the kids. Literally, the day I got out of surgery. Dropped me back off at the house. I'm in this traction thing for my knee. I'm on drugs. She went shopping, hung out. I can't remember exactly what she did, so I don't want to surmise, but she's gone for 5 or 6 hours. And I was left to take care of the kids. I'll never forget the youngest needing to change the diaper and crawling across the floor and trying. I still can't believe I was able to do that. And I can't believe I remember laying there and being upset, but I didn't have the maturity or the adulthood to stand up for myself. Like, that's heartbreaking to look back at myself that way and go, I couldn't protect myself. That's just sad to me. And that happens to both men and women. They put up with that. That's just heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to remember it and to know that I'm not the only one. There's millions of people who've had to do stuff like that. Another thing was she'd sleep with the TV on. Her father even developed, he was an engineer, he reworked the TV to plug in a remote headset, so I could sleep in the bed. She refused to use it. Forced me to sleep in the basement. It was a way to control me and keep me away. She controlled me sexually. I've talked about this before. In roughly 10 years of marriage, it's my recollection we had 12 instances of intimacy. An instance would include kind words, physical touch, or any type of a sexual act. That's abusive. Women do that a lot. They control through sex. They use anger and blame, or you made a mistake, and so I can't be sexual with you. Now, I'm please hear me when I bring this stuff up, that I'm not saying if you've ever said no to your husband, that makes you an abuser. I assume some people might jump to that conclusion. That's not what I'm saying. Okay. I'm sharing my history and how it played out in my life. And I don't know your situation and the particulars, but if you think if you're getting a big defensive reaction, there might be some truth in it. So you might want to go see an expert just to make sure, because maybe you're unaware that certain things you're doing are abusive, and maybe that's not your heart. But again, because we don't educate, well, we've educated much better on the female side, but we haven't educated how women are abusive. And so I think if there's some women here and they hear some things, they probably are completely unaware. And again, they were taught to be abusive. I'm not letting anyone off the hook, but my heart goes out to anyone who's an abuser. Okay. This one I'm going to be really vulnerable about. But I hesitated. I'm like, Kenny, if I'm not willing to talk about it, then how is a man who's listening going to be willing to get help, or a woman who's listening? In one of those moments of intimacy, my wife asked me to dance for her, do a strip tease. Thought it'd be fun, right? Well, I took a big risk and started to do it. And I got groove. But she started laughing and sneering and shaming me. It was a setup. It was all meant to manipulate me and demean me. It was never an attempt to have a fun, intimate encounter. It was meant to degrade me. And that was common in our relationship, to be set up. And that's common for all abusers, is they're incredibly manipulative in ways like that. One of the main ways she would abuse me is she'd constantly punch me in my arm and sneer at me. And that, there were times I'd say, look, could you stop? And she'd had the look. I just get these flashback memories of her eyes and the smile on her face. She's like, what? You can't take it? Aren't you a man? Other things like that. And you sit there, you want to talk about a helpless feeling. Because I don't think women realize this when they're condescending and rude, how decapitated we are as men to respond to that. Because there's such a societal bias, especially now, against men doing anything inappropriate, which is good. I'm not saying that should change, but it's decapitating in those moments. And she would do that quite often. There's another time where we were having an argument, and I said, you're just like my dad. And she just pummeled me. I mean, pummeled me. I huddled up and covered up, and she just wailed on me. I don't know, 20, 30, 40 punches all across my head, arms, and stuff. And then what an abuser does is justify it by saying, well, you should have never called me that. It's not okay. It's never okay. Physical violence, no matter what somebody says or does, unless you're given permission. Boxers, that's physical violence, but they both have given permission. MMA, there's all these versions. We're all physically violent. Well, not all. There are many ways we are physically violent with each other as a society, and we can condone it and consider it perfectly fine because there's consent. I don't care what anybody says or does, man or woman, it is never okay to hit without consent. She did not have my consent. And if you're a woman that's doing it, I don't care what he's done. Even if he's hit you, that's not consent. Call the police. If you hit back, then you're mutually abusive. It doesn't condone it ever. No woman should ever lay hands on a man unless he gives her permission, and vice versa. There's no excuse for it. There's no excuse for men to do it to women, and there's no excuse for women to do it to men. The other time, I'll never forget, was in the office, And I was holding our youngest daughter, and we were having another argument. And I told her she was a pill addict, because she was. I'll get to that in a minute. And she slapped me so hard, my ears, like, and I'll never forget the look on my daughter's face. That's the heartbreaking part, is the look on my daughter's face when she did that. I know I went numb. I just went quiet. I literally just turned and walked away. But I'll never forget the look on my daughter's face. Never. Yeah, that's a devastating one. And so, of course, that's, like I said, that, you know, it's what an abuser does. They say, well, you deserved it. You called me that. And it's not true. Nothing ever condones that. This was the psychological, honestly, the psychological aspect was the most horrific. Like, I would sit in front of her for 3 to 5 hours while she just gutted me and told me about all the problems I was creating, how bad I was, all these horrific things. And I would constantly ask questions. So if I do this, things will get better. And if I do this, things will get better. So you don't like this. Like, I kept trying to figure it out. What I finally figured out was, and this is what abusers do, I call it the roulette wheel. Literally 3 to 5 hours of taking psychological abuse and trying to figure it out, trying to get an answer so that she'd be happy. I would get her narrowed down to black 15. You know, think of a roulette wheel. It's like, out of all those options and the ball's spinning for hours, I finally have it narrowed down to black 15. And I can still see the look in her face when she'd realize I narrowed it. And then her eyes would flip and she'd start all over with something completely different. And we'd go again and again. The psychological aspect of all of that, the names, the disparaging about what a bad person I am, what a bad husband I am, bad father I am, bad worker, like, and you know, what's so crazy making about it is, by the end of it, you would be agreeing to something that you knew wasn't true. Like, for those of you who can see what I'm doing, this is water, right? Well, by the end of it, I'd be convinced that it's a Pepsi can. And I'm sorry for bringing Pepsi in the house. That was really, yeah, I should have never done that. Like, that literally, I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating. That's literally how I would walk away. And that was the only way I could end it, was I would have to agree to something that had never happened, that wasn't even true. I had to accept a reality that was false. That's severe psychological abuse, and that happens quite often. The other way I was controlled and coerced was, she was a prescription drug addict, and so I would be threatened with many things. I'd have to call the pharmacist and lie and beg for more pills. I'd have to call the doctors, same thing. I would call friends, if I had any friends, mostly her friends. I'd go around to neighbors in the neighborhood and call them and make up excuses about, well, they screwed up her prescription. Do you have any? God, I feel I've kind of blocked a lot of it out, but at least once a week. So I know there were weeks where it was 2 to 3 times in a week where I'm driving all around town, blowing off work so I can pick up pills for her. That's another way. Probably the worst aspect, and this is where I'm going to have to draw the line, was something they call parental alienation. When the divorce hit, it was an all-out assault on me, my character, and everything. Accusations of rape, raping my kids. I knew they were coming. I voluntarily subjected myself during the course of the divorce to 3 criminal polygraphs. Now, a criminal polygraph is some serious stuff. They tell you beforehand. The way the criminal polygraph, at least the ones I took, the way the scoring is from +4 to -4. Anything in the +2 to +4 range, they tell you beforehand, look, if you score in this range, we have to hold you for the police. There's a possibility that you abused your kids. Are you willing to take this test? I'm like, you bet. I subjected myself to 3 of those during the divorce. Totally voluntarily, was never asked to do it. I ponied up the money because of all the accusations. I did it on my own. The worst score I got on any of the polygraphs was a -2.6 or something, like way on the other side of the scale. But see, abusers are wonderful at manipulating and coercing people. And I could never get child services to look at the reports. And this is where, like, I want to draw the line as to how much more detail I get into, because part of what an alienator does, and both parents can do this in a divorce, is they turn the kids against the other. They make them a confidant. They share all the information about what a jerk the other parent is. They make them pass messages. They say, well, tell your dad this, tell your mom this. There are all these ways. That's a whole nother show. Maybe I need to do a show on what it is, because so many parents alienate in a divorce, and I don't think they even realize they're massively abusing their kids, and they use their kids as a conduit. And so I used to, for a while, I had 2 or 3 huge boxes of court documents. Therapist after therapist saying it's the worst case of parental alienation they've ever seen. In other words, her against me and alienating the kids against me. And it's so funny how gifted abusers are that nothing, right when we'd go to court, she'd always pull something out of the hat. But I can't get into those details. One, because my kids don't know. There were 3 times I lost my cool with my kids, because whenever I'd pick the kids up, they were constantly degrading me just like their mom, and you did this, you did this, you did this. And my response was always, your mom and dad love you. Sounds like you're really upset, but that's adult information. Your job is to be a kid. What would you like to do? What sounds kid-like to you? And I repeated that mantra over and over and over, except 3 times. I remember one time at a pizza restaurant, I went, that's not true. But I'm human. I think 3 times, considering what I went through, I'm okay with that. But they don't know that stuff. My kids really don't know me and don't know the situation. They've been told a version of me, and that's okay. But until I may end up having to go to the grave with them never knowing what really went on during the marriage or the divorce, and that's fine. It's not their job to make me okay. It's my job as a parent to be there for them. And if they want to have those opinions of me, they get to have them. If they ever decide they want to maybe dig a little deeper, that's their choice. But see, if I were to give them all this information, I'd be alienating them. They'd have a different view of their mother. How's that loving? And that's what most people do. Well, I need to tell them the truth. Like, she used to say that all the time. That was another thing. She posted a blog against court orders, just listing all these things about me, whether they were true or not, didn't matter. And, so for me to, in a sense, that's kind of what I'm doing. Like, I'm really trying. I've said some things, but there's some undercurrent. They know some of this stuff, but the deeper details, I'm not going to touch, out of protection for them, because I would just be alienating them and turning them against their mother, and their mother loves them. I mean, in her heart, she thought she was doing the best thing she could for them, and I don't blame her for that. Like I said, abusers were abused. She doesn't know any better. Doesn't make her a bad person. Just makes my heart break for her. So, but for me to get into the sordid details of it when my kids don't even know it, then I'd be abusing them and creating parental alienation. And I've just decided that's not who I want to be. It's not the kind of father I want to be. So if it's something they ever want to pursue, then I'll let them. So there's some other things I could get into. But again, out of respect for my kids, I'm going to leave it at that. But here's something else I have to own. I've been abusive too. I think back times with her where I'd play the victim, play the martyr. I was very passive aggressive, very sarcastic. Sarcasm isn't funny. When I see that on a dating profile, I run. Sarcasm is veiled abuse. It's become a societal way to abuse people. I was very sarcastic. That's abusive. I was abusive to her. I have to own that. I was also abusive by staying. My staying is condoning her abuse. I'm training her. This is okay. That's on me. That was my failure as a man to love her. I didn't say no. I mean, I don't shame and beat myself up for staying because I didn't have the tools I have now. Like now I could say that doesn't work for me. I wouldn't allow it. I didn't have that maturity or knowledge or information or anything. It was the best I could do. So I don't belittle myself for it, but I have to own that my allowing somebody to abuse me is abusive. And that's one of the problems I have with the Me Too generation. They don't want to own that piece. I'll get into that next week. And that's what perpetuates the cycle of abuse. So I was never physically abusive with her, but I was definitely psychologically abusive. I have to own that. And I could say coercively abusive too, because when you're backdoor manipulating like that, I'm controlling her through my martyrdom and all of that stuff. So that's kind of a deep topic. Some people be like, what? That doesn't make sense. And especially because in our efforts to protect abuse victims, we just give this blanket statement of they never did anything wrong, which isn't true. They're a part of it. If you have been abused, you played a part in it. You did. I'm not condoning it, but you played a part in it. And that's the problem that's why the abuse numbers are growing, in part because we don't want to deal with that aspect. Nobody wants to say that. Well, I'm going to say it. I'm going to deal with it. Because until we deal with it as in a culture that both sides are playing a part of it, that there are aspects that both join in on the process, we won't fix this problem. And so that's why I have to lead and admit, yeah, I've been abusive. And in other relationships too, verbally abusive, you bet. And I have to admit this too, I participated in intimate dynamics. I'd mentioned the whole 50 Shades of Grey stuff. I participated both giving and receiving, but in a consensual way. And so I need to get that out there. That's like I said, if two people are consenting, it's no different than MMA, anything else. That's a different topic, but I want to own that there have been moments in my life where the things I've listed that are abusive were okay because there was consent from both sides. And so I want to make sure you understand that if you as a couple, if you participate in things like that, hell, if you just go to kickboxing, you're participating in a form of abuse. You're just condoning it. It's no different. So I want to make sure there's a distinction there. All right, I'm getting close on time here, man. I may need to do several shows on this because I feel like I haven't even talked about anything. Here are signs to look for, men, because I think most men have no idea that they're being abused. And so I want to go through a laundry list of things so you can look at it and go, oh my God, this isn't right. Okay, if you're afraid to tell your partner how you feel because you're afraid of getting put down or threatened, that's abusive. Remember I said it earlier. I wouldn't say anything because of that exact same reason. If your partner treats you with disrespect and ignores or makes fun of your ideas and feelings, it's exactly what I went through. Again, it creates a fear. You can't be you. You're afraid to disagree because you don't want to unleash your partner's anger and violence. The disagreement is an excuse for abuse. That's carbon. That's exactly what I went through. Your partner ignores your needs and wants. Your partner pushes you into situations that make you uncomfortable or frighten or degrade you. Well, I explained that, having to take care of the kids, after surgery and stuff like that. Lots of situations where I went through that. Your partner accuses you of flirting or having an affair and orders you not to talk to another woman. They act jealous or possessive. They harass you about affairs, and about affairs they imagine you're having. So if it's this constant theme, even though you've given them all your social media and everything, you shouldn't do that. That's feeding into the abuse, but most likely because of the things I said earlier, you are. That's abusive. Your partner does not allow you to spend time doing things on your own. Your partner sees this as a challenge or threat to your relationship. I've done that. I have to admit, I've done that. When my love addiction was off the chart, I was incredibly possessive like that. I did that kind of stuff. There's a pattern of increasing ongoing abuse in your relationship, whether it's emotional, physical, sexual, and or intimidation. I'm going to get into more of the details. That's a broad brushstroke. Things like put downs. Are you insulted or humiliated at home or in public? Are you called names? Do they shout at you? Shouting is abusive. Well, I've shouted. I've been abusive. Have to own it. I can hear people go, oh, well, everybody shouts. Yeah, but it's abusive. You have to own it. It's the only way it gets better. Doesn't mean I'll never shout again. And on a grand scale of putting a a semi-automatic weapon up to someone's head versus shouting at them, I'll take shouting any day, but it's still abusive. And I have to own that. Here's some of the subtle ways a woman will abuse you. Say things like, you shouldn't wear that shirt. Why would you, maybe you're at a dinner party and you drive away and they go, why would you say something like that? You shouldn't add sugar to your coffee. It's poisonous. Or say something like, you really shouldn't hang out with that guy. He's bad for you. Those little innocuous, subtle judgments and critiques that demean you. See, most people go, well, what's the big deal? I'm just giving my opinion. Yeah, but because of the lack of maturity in this culture and no one knows about boundaries or codependence, you don't ever give anyone your opinion unless they ask for it. It's not your place. That's codependence. That's immaturity. It's none of your business, even in a deep relationship. But yet everyone thinks, oh, that's normal. That's the problem. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is people think that's normal. Sorry, that's second grade. That's elementary emotional maturity. That's why divorces and everything's a mess, is because we lack the maturity to realize little things like that are abusive and destroy a relationship. They're codependent, all the other things. There's a lack of boundaries in that. That's why I bring it up. They control your finance, whether they withhold financial information or they steal money from you or they try and control how you spend money. Maybe they make financial decisions that affect you without asking or telling you. I went through all of those things. They isolate you and restrict you and restrict your freedoms. They control your partner's contact with their friends and family. They isolate you from your friends and families, where you go, what you wear. That was me. Like, I was on an island for 10 years, literally. No friend, nothing. I was purely dependent upon her. That's classic abuse. You get treated like a servant. Your phone calls are monitored. Maybe they restrict your ability to get around. They take your car keys or your money, or they prevent you from going to work. They control the access to information or participation in organizations or groups. Maybe there's spiritual abuse. They ridicule or insult your beliefs. They make it difficult for them to be with others in a spiritual community. Now I'm going to get into physical abuse stuff because I see I'm running out of time. Like, man, I could go for hours on this. Physical abuse, shoving, slapping, hitting of any type, even a little tap on the arm, kicks, biting, choking, anything that hurts you or your children or your pets. I did that. I have to admit, my second wife, I hated her cat. I was abusive to her cat. I'd spray a water bottle at it. It was very abusive. I have to own that. Do they throw things at you? Do they use a weapon or threaten to use a weapon? Do they intentionally interfere with basic daily requirements for food, shelter, medicine, sleep? That's what happened to me. Remember about the TV? I couldn't sleep. And then I'd get yelled at if I didn't sleep with her. Yet she didn't work. She could sleep all day. And then she'd stay up all night till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning watching TV really loud. Well, I was screwed. I can't sleep with the TV on. Eventually, I did get enough. Somehow, I spent the last, I don't know how many years sleeping in the basement. Withhold affection and sex to punish you for violating rules, or they force you to have sex or engage in acts against your will. Again, I went through that. They throw or smash things. They trash your clothes or your possessions or destroy your keepsakes. Maybe they destroy furniture or punch holes in the walls or break appliances. Now, maybe after you're separated, do they follow you and stalk you? Do they show up at your workplace or go to your house and park outside? She would stalk me online. Do they phone or send mail repeatedly? Do they send the phone or send mail to families and friends trying to turn them against you or make them a confidant? Do they get angry when drinking or using drugs? Do they regularly threaten to leave or to make you leave? Do they threaten to hurt you or a family member? There's another one. Do they punish or deprive you of your children, or even deprive the children when they're angry at you? Do they threaten to kidnap the children if you leave? Do they manipulate you with lies and contradictions? Man, did that ever happen to me? It was so funny too. Like, because she said she'd never lied in her life. She actually passed I think it was a polygraph for the police force saying she never lied. She'd convinced herself she didn't lie. But this is how she'd do it. And we had conversations about it. You had to ask the exact question like this. What am I doing? I took a drink of water. If you said to her, did you just have a drink? She'd say, no, I didn't. You'd have to say, did you just have a drink of water? Yes, I had a drink of water. That's one of the ways she'd lie, nonstop. You had to be, that's part of how I'd get caught on that roulette wheel for hours, is I had to be so precise with the words to find out what's going on, and I got really good at it. That's why it would spin off of red 15 to black 20. They're very good at that, incredibly good at lying. Okay, now to the women who have hung in there and watched this. If at any time you found yourself trying to justify and say, that's not a big deal, that's not abuse, that's just fun. If you found yourself angry at me, if you found yourself wanting to argue with me, if you just deleted me, if you just blocked me, if you just cursed me, that's a huge red flag that you abuse men. I want to let that sink in. That's a huge red flag that you abuse men. I'm not guaranteeing that you do, but you need to go talk to somebody and get more information. Denial, all of those are classic reactions to denial, to not wanting to admit and see a piece of ourselves. So again, if that's happened to you and you want to blow me up and curse me, that's fine. I will love you enough not to join in your denial, and I will let you stay right where you are, and I won't judge you. I know why you're doing it. It's the same reason I did it. It's a lack of self-esteem. It's from the abuse you've been through, and right now you feel like it's your only option, and my heart breaks for you. Literally breaks for you. I don't want anyone to feel the kind of frustration you're feeling at hearing this stuff. And I know that you got taught because of your own abuse history. And I urge you to please go work with somebody, heal that past abuse, get help. So I have a heart for you, not any judgment of you. Okay? So I'm going to end it. My call is everybody share this. It's time we all face this common problem we both have and reach out to each other and become more educated emotionally and intellectually. If you're a man out there and this hit a chord with you and you're looking for help, please reach out to me. There are very few resources for men. I'll do everything I can to get you help. If you're looking, if you're an abusive woman, you'd like solutions, whichever side of the fence you're on, whether I can work with you individually or the groups that I run, if I have resources available to you, please reach out. I'm going to end it there. Heavy topic. I hope you're all okay. I hope go do some self-love and self-care right now. All right. Now remember, as I always say, whenever we judge, blame, or criticize somebody, all we're ever doing is seeing something in ourselves that we haven't reconciled. But the opposite is true also. Whenever you see something in somebody else, whenever you see greatness, those qualities that just capture you, what you're seeing is the greatest version of you. If you hear that and you can't accept that, then the greatness movement is for you. Send me an email, kenny@thegreatnessmovement.com. Let's get you in a group. Let's get you pursuing your greatness. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Take care.
I can do anything. I can reach any goal today. I can do what I want. I can be what I want to be.
Coach on Fire Radio.